Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Tim Kubiak, who is a sales coach and a business strategist. Welcome to the program, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Pleasure to be on.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to talking with you because, of course, sales and marketing go so well together. It's just like a perfect integration. A lot of people feel they're the same thing, and then you start factoring in selling, B2C, B2G, B2B, all the different nuances. So I'm excited to learn from you, but give us a little bit of an introduction and a background on what led you then to focus on sales in your consulting.
Sure, and it really came out of my corporate career. So I spent the better part of 25 to 30 years selling in the B2B technology space, frankly, globally. And one of the beauties of going upstream in your career and growing in it is you get other opportunities. But one of the downsides is you kind of lose touch with the customers and you lose touch with the sellers and the things that you loved early on. So that's literally what led me into the consulting side of the business. I decided I didn't want to live in a hotel 200 nights a year anymore, and I wanted to work with people that were still carrying a bag or driving a business where the numbers were a little more realistic.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big piece. Now, I'm certain that you're alluding to the fact that that was many years ago, because today we've got so many virtual tools and technology, a lot like Zoom or whatever tool, that maybe you wouldn't have to be out and about as much. Has that changed since you were, the road warrior that you were?
So it has, right? And it's really been the change in the last 14 months or so. But literally running up to January 2020, I was still on planes every week. I was still 4 or 5 cities sometimes in a week. Fortunately, it was all domestic. But as the pandemic hit, I did come off the road, and I love my Zoom account. It's saved me a lot of travel time.
So that's a pretty interesting point. Obviously, COVID is a blip in our history that we worked through and will continue to work through. But here's something that I wonder if you've noticed. You were in such a mode of, here's the way I do things, right? Here's my client in whatever state. I'm going to hop on a plane. I'm going to do this. And now people were forced to go virtual. What do you feel like when the whole, when we can get back to doing whatever we want, whenever we want, do you feel like there will now be a split, a percentage split? So, hey, maybe Tim's not going to be road warrior 300 days a year, but maybe it's going to be 50 because I still want to have the belly to belly. But boy, being able to pop on a Zoom and have live interactions, that sure freed up efficiencies and time. Do you think that an element of that is going to move forward in any kind of sales organization?
So I do, and if I look across my own client set, which is mid-sized enterprise to large public companies largely, a lot of them have cut T&E this year for the sales teams. They've even still severely restricted T&E for the executive team. So only, exceptions are going to get to travel. Now, I think as we come out of this and go into other years, I think you'll see reduced travel, but I do think you'll see some of that belly-to-belly increase. I think there's things, trade shows in particular, and those type of meetings where you can do 27 face-to-face meetings in a day and a half and go home. Yeah. I think we'll see those come back sometime next year. I've got my eyes on a couple for fall if everything holds out that I'll roll the dice and go to.
Yeah, and even that, let's even touch on that, because I know for a B2B organization that's a big opportunity. But I have, years ago, I spoke to this consultant that said he went into one of his clients and said, hey, what's your biggest business development initiative? And they go, trade shows. He goes, good, let's talk about that. And basically, when they explained the fact that they go to the biggest trade shows in their industry, but they really feel like it's not a wonderful opportunity for the 1 or 2 or 3 people there for travel and the using of their time. So what they do is they rent the booth and they send everything ahead, and they just have all their flyers, everything laid out. And the guy goes, I about, shook the room going, that is a missed opportunity. You can't just assume that people pick up a flyer and know exactly what you do. So let's talk a little bit about how would you recommend when you are working with your clients to best utilize a trade show, whether it's even technology at the trade show or making sure that you can have those sales conversations and then a follow-up afterwards?
I think you have to classify who's attending a trade show and what their objectives are by their roles. So you're from the marketing side. So the marketing folks, right, can make sure it goes seamless coordination. But the things I've seen marketing teams do that make them exceptional is, it's setting up the one-on-one chats away from the booth with either top customers or top prospects or people you're trying to form strategic alliances with and facilitating that, which kind of pivots towards, who's working the booth, whether it's a technical resource or a sales resource, and whether their messaging's on point and it's all coordinated, and then finally the executive presence, shuffling the right executives in front of the right people at the right times. I look at trade shows sort of a nonstop circus, 18 hours a day. You're doing breakfast meetings, you're doing coffee meetings, you're working the floor, maybe you're speaking at breakouts, and I think that's often a missed opportunity, is to take the breakout away from the normal narrative and actually give something, not a product announcement, but something really insightful to a broader audience. And then, there's always the after events things. That's personally where I struggle. I'm much better at coffee meetings than I am at cocktail hours. So you'll find me in the corner with a cup of coffee by that point in the day.
Yeah. And let's even think about that for a second. If someone knows that is a strength or a weakness and they just know it's just not going to change, then you need to bring someone that is that, outgoing person so that you can be, handling the breakfast side of things, and then someone else is going to handle the other, meetings. And I think that's a really big piece. Like, for instance, I envision, people at the trade shows kind of like in front of the booth and interacting with people. And then, you watch the Marcus Lemonis profit shows, and then some of his people, he'll test them and say, okay, let's go do this, presentation of the show. And there's the person in the middle of the aisle just kind of, mumbling. And so you've got to know your strengths, and if it is a weakness you can work on, wonderful. But I feel like there is, in a sales situation, you can always be working and improving, yes. But if you know that you're going to be going for something like this, like a trade show, maybe bring in someone that's going to be the strength to your weakness.
Absolutely, right? And that's the beauty. Team selling, especially in the business-to-business world, is something we've seen more and more of over the last decade, right? The solutions tend to be longer sales cycle, more complex, more competitive. It's a great chance to just leverage that natural synergy you pointed out.
And let's think about now synergy and take that into, something else that obviously sales professionals use, which is technology. So in B2B selling, how do you best use technology, and how do you make sure that your team is not hiding behind it?
Oh, boy, that last one hurts. But I'm going to start with the last part. And that is, I think you have to look at how you've structured your sales organization. And I'll use the example of an order entry team, which is a sales function, certainly, versus a business development team. An order entry team that sits and is on their ERP system and processing things, or maybe even a customer service team that's fielding things that come in via the web and not all live call, they can be fronted by technology. Where I think people miss the boat is, I'm going to send out 4 million cold emails, and if nobody answers, man, I've sent out 4 million cold emails, I feel good, that's great.
Yeah.
But it's missing that live touch, right? And I work with some founders and some early stage companies as part of what I do from time to time. And so often they're like, what's our social media campaign? And to that point, they want to hide behind the technology, even to gather product data to help in their builds. And they're missing the point because they stay in their own echo chambers instead of really stepping out and getting true customer feedback and feeding that back through the marketing organization and the engineering organizations. So you have to have live interaction. You can't do everything in a survey. Absolutely. There's a time and place for tech. The best thing I did in my career ever was when people would send me an angry email, I'd pick up the phone and call them. Because then you hear what's really going on and you have a chance to solve it real time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And here's something else. You mentioned social media, and there's the thing now these days called social selling. And I wish that phrase wasn't ever invented, because I think that when salespeople think that they liked or comment or shared or something on their prospect social media account, that they're selling. Well, they're not. They're kind of staying visible, maybe, but until you have that interaction. Now, again, it could be belly to belly live, it could be phone live, it could be Zoom live, but those touches, those emails, and those social medias just kind of keep you sort of top of mind. But you should always be driving people to go, hey, you know what? I've got something that I think would really help you out. Let's jump on the phone. Let me show it to you real quick.
Yeah, and to build on that a little bit, Mike, one thing I see people do is they send out the stock stuff to everybody. And look, automations are great. They're there for a reason, right? And that is, to your point, that's that broad spectrum touch. But if you have somebody you're really selling to, send them something that actually relates your conversation with them, right?
Yeah.
Industry news, whatever. Just don't feed what's come out of the marketing team, because they've worked hard on it, but it may not land as well.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. And it's going to be a little different for each organization, but I feel like there are some of those constants that always should be there. Let's shift in thinking about the consumer buyer's process, the customer journey, and you can call it many different names, but in academia, it's like the buyer's journey. And in reality, what I define it as, whatever you're selling, unless it's like gum or pencils, people need to have some things answered in their own mind about your product or service. If it's a larger ticket item, they're not going to just go, oh, flyer purchase or website purchase. So what are those big pillar pieces of content that they, or decision making that they need to understand? And when you can educate your target audience on that, whether it's through, hey, look at this webinar, or hey, let's get on the phone, now you're drawing them through and attracting them through the buyer's journey. Talk a little bit about that as it relates to sales and even in B2B.
So it starts with, and you talk about the buyer's journey. Years ago, it was research, right, and then interact, and then buy was really how the buyer's journey looked, and it's still very much that way. So you have to, from a web presence, you have to have relevant material out there. You have to make it so your customer and the person who's looking for your solution can find you, and find you in terms that they use, not that you use. And then you can build on that. And when they reach out and interact, that's where you really have an opportunity to stand apart. But you have to have that. That's almost table stakes anymore. In the old days, it would have been brochureware, and I like the car sales analogy. It used to be you walked into a car dealer and they handed you this glossy brochure, and that's really the only place other than industry magazines or the paper and whatever they were promoting that you could get information. Now,
yes,
buyers are so much better informed. They come in, they know what they want. I'm upgrading my home studio, right, because I've moved my office into my home in the past year. And I've done so much research on standing desks and monitor stands and everything else. I've got 6, 8, 10, 12 options that I've got to decide between. But I started with the research, and okay, how much of a tilt do I need? How much of this do I need? And the more complex it is, the more likely you're going to have that live interaction. So yeah, I can click and buy ultimately, but even a couple $100 here and a couple $100 there, people are researching. I'm reading reviews. Your customer's reading reviews. They're looking for the experience. They're looking for the technical specs. You can't overlook that, and they have to be easy to find.
Yeah. And I think here's something else. Have you ever read that book, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes?
I've not read that one, no.
I would highly recommend it. It's a classic, sales. He was a top business consultant, and the gist of it was he turned his advertising organization around by shifting from sell and tell to education and content. And they didn't call it content marketing then, but he trained his teams to go out and teach and explain and be an educator for whatever product or service. And people appreciate that. And this was decades ago, and people still appreciate that now, because I don't want to be told what's it going to take to get you into this thing or car or whatever. So here's an observation that I have is once you determine what exactly those main core pillars that your prospects must understand to make a buying decision for you. Now, how do you educate them on that? And there's a huge amount of opportunity, right? You can say, well, let's do a webinar. Well, you know what? I know for me, if I see a webinar that looks interesting and I go, okay, well, that time doesn't work for me, so I'm not going to do it. Or let me register and something came up. Or so maybe it needs to just be on demand. So do a teaching video 5-10 minutes and say, watch this, or maybe it's a YouTube. So what are some ways that you teach your salespeople to make sure that their target audience understands kind of some of the key elements about their deliverable?
So we really start with, it's a modification of the buyer's journey. And when I sit down with a new client, what we do is we look at their existing customers, we look at defining what an ideal customer is. And that sounds great, because everybody likes to spit out, oh, I sell to enterprises between this many employees and this many things and this many dollars and this geography. That's great. Those are baseline starting points. But what we really do is we look at who in the stack by business function and by title level has to be involved. And we do a very simple traffic light method, red, yellow, green. CFO always has to sign off on your kind of project, or no, right? Or at certain dollar amounts. And this is before we get into customer specific planning. And we simply go through, and it's a grid. We do it on a nice digital format, but you can do it on a piece of paper if you're listening and curious. Go look at who you're selling to and who's involved in the buying decisions at a macro level, and create that as a template for when you're going into new accounts or trying to sell expanded areas in accounts. And just simply say, okay, normally we sell to this type of person. Normally the chief marketing officer is involved. And it is a checkbox exercise, and the decision's really made by the director of marketing or the VP of marketing or whatever you have. And do that. And that's one of the areas people miss, because they're taking a widespread approach. The more people I talk to, the more people that are going to buy. And it's not true. You have to talk to the right people. They have to fit the right profiles. Right? In advertising, is it the right avatar for what you're selling? And salespeople, especially in B2B, need to have that nailed down too.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, let's kind of just wrap it up with what are some key points that someone might go, you know what? I think I heard something interesting and I might want to learn a little bit more. So what's the best way that someone could reach out, connect with you, and maybe get that introduction of a conversation and see what Tim Kubiak could help their organization out with?
Sure. So the best place to find everything I do is at timkubiak.com, and it's TIMKUBIAK.com. You can also find me on all the social media platforms. I will give anyone an hour of my time who wants to have a conversation. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a hook. I treat you like a paying client. At the end of it, if you want to talk about more, fantastic. If not, time invested. Wish people the greatest amount of success. And, I have a ton of content on there. I do a podcast myself. It's business founders and executives and leaders. So you can check that all out from the same place on the site.
Excellent. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure talking with you.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.